some of the factors that are in play as we kind of look ahead over the next several months. Our thoughts will be turning to planting here pretty soon. It seems like we're just now ginning the crop we've already got, and now we're thinking about turning around and planting another crop. None of this is probably new to y'all if you keep your ear to the ground. None of this is new information or earth-shattering to any of y'all. We know we've got a record level of world stocks. At one time, at one time, that was a concern, still is. But as we've all come to know, it depends on who holds that cotton and what they're doing with it. That's just as important as the level of stocks itself. And we'll talk about that as we kind of move through. Another thing that we don't talk enough about, because in economics and supply and demand, as y'all know, everything's relative. We don't operate in a vacuum on the supply side. In my book, demand has been an issue. We took a big hit in cotton usage a couple of years ago whenever we went real high in terms of price. Cotton took a big hit. It's starting to come back. That's good news, but it's coming back slow. The growth is slow. And when we've got record stocks the way that we have, eventually those stocks will have to enter the pipeline. We got to whittle those stocks down somehow. And obviously the only way to do that is through the demand side, through purchase and use of it. So we need to see, we have seen slowly improving demand. We'll talk quite a bit this morning in the next few minutes about acreage and production, particularly U.S. acreage and production for this next year. 2 months ago, I wouldn't have given you much of a chance that we'd see an increase in cotton acreage this year. I just wouldn't have. But things are, as we said, are starting to slowly improve, and most folks you talk to nowadays think we're going to see an increase in cotton acreage this year. There was no indication of that a couple of months ago if you kind of poll people around the industry. I saw a little thing, the National Cotton Council's numbers I think will come out, what, in a couple of weeks, sometime early February?
I think on the 7th.
7th. And we'll see what their numbers say, but I thought it was interesting. I didn't see it till after I got back from Beltwide. I got back from Beltwide and started thumbing through my emails, and there was something in one of the media outlets about a survey, just if you want to call it a windshield survey, somebody with one of the media outlets that was asking people at the Beltwide what they thought acreage was going to do this year, U.S. acreage. And just an informal sort of thing, going around and asking some of the industry leadership, cotton leadership, what they thought. And lo and behold, pretty much to a T, everybody thought acreage was going to increase. So we'll see. The last thing that we'll talk very briefly about, although it's very important, is Chinese stocks. Their policy with regard to stocks and the impact that that's going to have on imports or U.S. exports. This is kind of a look at December 14 cotton futures. Look where we were back in early part of December, late November, down around that 76 mark. That's not going to get anybody excited about growing cotton. And I'll be honest with you, 80 cents is not going to get a lot of people excited either. But you got to plant something. And the other things that you would plant in lieu of cotton, those aren't looking particularly attractive either. So if you look at the little run we've made, we're just a tad under 80 cents now. New crop December futures. I still don't think that gets a lot of folks excited, but I'll remind you that at this time last year, the 2013 crop year was about at this same level. And you know where we went. We went close to 90 cents a couple of times. Not saying that we'll go there this time, I'm just saying we got a long way to go. And the fact that we've gone from a 76-cent level that got nobody's attention now, knocking on the door of 80 cents, is quite impressive and something that we need to keep in mind. This is just a look at our acreage. We've had 2 consecutive years where we've had declines in acreage due to competition from corn and soybeans. I'm gonna be honest with you, the more I start thinking about it, and I'm not sure what order some of these slides are in here, so I'm gonna kind of jump around. Let's look at this one, and I'll kind of come back. And I know this is busy, and I know you guys in the back can really see this well, because I can barely see it from here. Let me try to explain to you what we're looking at here, and I know I'm bouncing around, and I apologize. This is what we did this year. We planted 10.41 million acres. We walked away from almost 26.5% of those acres, most of those in Texas, as you know. We had a yield of 826, so that had us producing 13.2 million bales. Well, all these numbers out to the side here are my attempt to kind of make a point, and that is starting in a couple of weeks when the council releases their acreage number, and then we'll get into the end of March and USDA will do their planting intentions number, and then we'll get into June and USDA will release its actual acreage number. You know what? None of it matters. None of it matters. Because until we have a better handle on how much of that is actually going to be harvested, and until we get a handle on the crop conditions and what the yield potential looks like, the fact that our acreage may be up a little bit or down a little bit or whatever, yeah, it's a nice number to bounce around and it makes for good conversation over a cup of coffee, but come on, guys. What really matters is what's going to happen to the crop once we get it in the ground. The last, let's go back, and I apologize for bouncing around. Look at for 3 consecutive years now, we've had large abandonment. 3 years ago, the 2010 crop, we abandoned 36% of that acreage. 60% of the Texas crop, I believe it was 60% was the number that was walked away from out there. 24% 2 years ago, 26% this year. Also, if you look down here, and I did not realize this because frankly, I don't keep track of what goes on out on the left coast. But California is experiencing a drought. California is not near as big a cotton state as they used to be, but they're important, particularly on the quality. And California is facing a drought. And you add that on top of the continuing drought that we continue to have in Texas. All I'm saying is that regardless of what happens in planted acreage, what really is going to drive this market, as it has the last couple of years, is the crop conditions and what we're going to be able to harvest and what the yield outlook looks like. Texas and Georgia combined now account for just over half of total U.S. production. That number's a little bit inflated, particularly on the Georgia side, and deflated a little bit on the Texas side because of yield differences and acreage abandonment and all that sort of thing. But the point is that Texas and Georgia combined, those two are very important and account for over half of our crop. This is a little bit of a look at the production and use issue that I talked about. We've had 4 or 5 consecutive years now where production has outpaced demand or use. If you see back here, 5 or 6 years ago, it was just the opposite, that we were using more cotton than we were producing. We were drawing down on stocks. And then we really started to take a hit on the demand side, the use side. You see we dropped from almost 120 million bales down to around 105 during that time. Our use really dropped off. Some of that, a lot of that was due to the high cotton prices we had during part of that time. Our production, we had a low production year here back in 2009 worldwide. We've rebounded from that. Our production's trended down some, but again, we're producing, because of that drop in demand, the drop in use, we're still producing quite a bit more cotton than we're using out there, and as a result, we're building stocks. All these stocks that we have got to enter the pipeline at some point. One of the interesting things that, I'm going to skip around to this one. One of the interesting things that is happening, though, most of that buildup in stocks, as you know, has occurred in China. A lot of people have made notice of the fact that cotton in the rest of the world, while China has been building stocks, actually the stocks in the rest of the world, everything outside of China, and that includes us, has actually tightened up a bit. So the fact that we've got a record amount of world stocks, that's important, but the fact that 60% of it or more is in one country, if China decides, and at one point they had, if they decide just to sit on that and not put that in the pipeline, not use that for any reason, that in effect reduces supply greatly. It artificially draws those stocks down, and as you can see, stocks in the rest of the world over the last couple of years have kind of tightened up a little bit. So our outlook really depends on what happens in China. This is not really a timeline, but it's kind of a bullet list of some of the things that have been going on with regard to China. Over the course of 2 years, they were building stocks. A lot of people ask why. I don't really know. Some of you in this room who have a much better eye and a much better ear on what happens overseas than I do might want to make some comment on that. But no one really knows why China, at least I don't, decided to start building all these stocks. We do know that their stocks got extremely low a couple of years ago. China likes to hold a lot of cotton. I just figured that they do so, number one, to make sure that they have a stable supply, first and foremost. They're the largest textile user in the world. They're the largest importer of cotton in the world. I figured that they like to have a lot of cotton around to provide stability for their mill industry. So they started buying a lot of cotton over the past 2 or 3 years. The impact of that was good while it was happening, because they bought a lot of cotton from us to do that. When they were buying cotton, when they were building stocks, that helped support prices. But now that they've got them, now that China sits there with all this cotton, what happens depends on what they decide to do with it. This year, the 2013-14 crop marketing year, their imports are going to reduce by half of what they have been the previous 2 years. Rumor is that they're going to reduce their need for imports even more during the 2014 crop year. Now you think about that. China is our number one customer when they're buying. If they decide that they don't need as much cotton for whatever reason, and at the same time, the U.S. increases acreage, and we might produce a little bit more, that's one of those things that are kind of on the downside with regard to price, so we will have to keep an eye on that. But it's very important what China decides to do this year with regard to their need for imports. But we know they built stocks over a period of a couple of years. We know their imports are way down this year because of those stocks. News is that they're going to reduce imports even more this next year. China had begun to auction off its stocks. The funny thing about it, though, whenever they made those stocks available, their mills didn't want them. Price was a factor. Fiber quality was a factor. Their mills didn't want that cotton. So China's sitting there with all this cotton that they built up, and they begin to auction it off to try to reduce those stocks, and what happens? Their mills don't want it. And they continue to buy cotton. So this is going to be a factor. What's going to happen to those stocks? Are those stocks going to eventually enter the marketplace or not? What impact will that have on the U.S.'s ability to export cotton to them? What will be their demand for imports? Something that I read that just, and some of y'all might have seen this as well, something that just came across the media just this week or latter part of last week, was a story that says that some of China's mills are closing and are going to relocate elsewhere. Isn't that interesting? The article even said that there was one mill that was closing down in China and was going to relocate to the U.S., of all places. And some of the mills like moving to Vietnam or whatever. I guess I say all this and have those 6 bullet items there basically just to say that China is increasingly a source of instability and uncertainty. And that's very vital for us. It's very important for us in kind of an unfortunate way because we're the world's largest supplier of exports. And China's our #1 customer. It's important what they do and how they do it. And the fact is, we don't know. They're a source of uncertainty and instability worldwide and particularly for us. As far as the outlook goes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, if you just look at what might happen on the acreage side, it seems like we'll have the potential to see an increase in production this year, both here in the U.S. and worldwide. But again, as I mentioned before, weather and other things are certainly going to come into play, so that's yet to be seen. Demand should continue to improve. China says they're going to decrease their imports, their need for imports, that's U.S. exports. I agree with most of what everybody else is saying out there, and that is that we expect December futures to be between 75 and 85 cents. That's kind of a nickel either way of kind of where the market is right now. If we, that 85 cents, that upper end of that range will kind of be dependent on obviously what happens to acreage and production around the world. We'll also have to wait and see what happens in terms of China and their need for imports, and thus how much cotton we'll be able to export out of what we do this next year. Amanda's going to cover our budgets and talk about some net returns, but I will end up with this. This kind of gives you a comparison of what we call relative prices. Let's look at March 1st. As of March 1st last year, December cotton was at 85 cents. We had December corn at 5.5 and soybeans a little under $13. This was as of March 1st last year. And the corn, the ratio of corn to cotton was about 6.5, and the ratio of soybeans to cotton was just under 15. Fast forward to where we are right now. December yesterday, as you see, at essentially 80 cents. That's not as good as where we were last March, but look at where corn and soybeans are. Corn's $1 lower, soybeans over $1 lower. Those price ratios have slipped relative to, even though cotton's down, the price ratio, relative prices have slipped for corn and soybeans relative to cotton. So that's what's got a lot of people thinking, even though we're not really happy about 80-cent cotton, particularly compared to where we were on this past year's crop. When you look at relative prices and think about the acreage competition out there, people are still thinking that cotton's going to at least hold its own and maybe even come back some, because the other alternatives are not as attractive price-wise as they were last year. Anybody have a quick question? I'll leave it there and let Amanda cover some of our budget stuff and look at net returns for this next year. Anybody have a quick question? Nobody? Okay.